everyone. Welcome to the second episode of A Sue and a J. Today I really just wanted to share our trying to conceive history and our trying to adopt history and give everybody a little bit of background as to why we're doing IVF. I know a lot of people might wonder why we're not shooting towards adoption, or why we're not going towards foster care, or do we even need IVF? Can we just kind of wait it out and see? So I just wanted to really, give our history and kind of catch you guys up to speed as to why we are where we're at. So, like I said in previous video, we got married over 9 years ago. So about 3 months into our marriage, we stopped preventing, and 2 months later, we were pregnant. We were only 19 years old, which is crazy. And I remember pretty early on having some bleeding and pain and went to the ER. I physically passed a small little sac and everything, and the nurse took it and confirmed that it was fetal tissue. And she said, "I'm so sorry, but you definitely miscarried. Your HCG numbers have dropped really low, and you're definitely miscarrying." So we went home and just kind of accepted it and knew that that can happen. 1 in 4 women miscarry. That will be fine. So 2 weeks went by. My husband was in training, out of state, keep in mind. And I still to this day don't remember driving myself to the hospital, but apparently I did. And when I woke up, I was told that I was pregnant with twins. I had lost one baby, and the other one was in my fallopian tube. This is known as a heteroectopic pregnancy. It's super, super, super rare to have one in your uterus, one in your fallopian tube. And the doctor believed that the reason I lost the first one was because of all the bleeding and stuff going on with the tubal pregnancy. It can cause a lot of inflammation, a lot of stuff going on down there. So they had to go in and do surgery and remove that baby. If you don't know what an ectopic is, it's when the embryo is literally stuck in your fallopian tube instead of your uterus. And your fallopian tube is about the size of a mechanical pencil lead. So super, super tiny your fallopian tubes are. So when a baby gets stuck in there, they have no other option but to remove that pregnancy, because the baby has no chance of viability in the fallopian tube, and it will kill the mother if it goes untreated. So that happened. So we lost twins when we were 19 years old due to a heteroectopic. They sewed me back up and said, "You should have no problems. You got pregnant after 2 months, do it again." So we had to wait. They make you have a time period of like, don't touch each other for so many weeks, because you just had the surgery. So it took 2 more months, and we were pregnant again a few months later. And same thing, bleeding, pressure, went into the doctor and found out it was another ectopic pregnancy in my right fallopian tube. Same fallopian tube, same story. At this point, they cut it out, and when I woke up, the doctor had cut out my right ovary and fallopian tube and said that they were pretty scarred from endometriosis. So at this point, I was told that I had stage 4 endometriosis, and that he highly recommended I get a hysterectomy immediately, that I could die without it. So we refused. We did our research and I refused to castrate myself at 19 years old. At this point, I think I'd turned 20. So he told us, you're fertile, you're young, go ahead and keep trying. And it's very, very rare to have 1 ectopic, let alone 2, which you did. So you're not likely to have a 3rd, especially now that we've removed the bad fallopian tube. So we had to have a test called an HSG. It's a hysterosalpingogram. And it is where they inject dye into your fallopian tubes, or in my case, my one and only tube, to make sure that it's clear and free of obstruction so that an embryo can pass through. I had that test done 4 times in a span of like 5 years, and it was clear every single time. So we tried to conceive after that, and nothing happened. We never got pregnant. It was so bizarre because we got pregnant so easily with the other 2 pregnancies. We ended up doing 10 rounds of Clomid, which is a stimulating drug to help you make more follicles than just one. Most women every month ovulate from one follicle, which contains one egg. When you do things like Clomid, you'll typically end up with 3 or 4 follicles and possibly have multiples that way, but it gives you a higher chance of pregnancy because you have more eggs that could fertilize. We did 10 rounds of that with no pregnancy. A few more months went by, or a year or so. My husband was in training. We ended up doing 2 IUIs, which stands for intrauterine insemination. And this is where they inject your husband's sperm closer to the eggs. They actually inject it up there. So even though we had no issues with Jeremy, there was no sperm issues, everything on him checked out. It's just something that can give you a higher pregnancy rate. So we did that 2 times and never got pregnant. At that point, we let a year go by. I went to a worship school out in Colorado, and we really just enjoyed one another. We traveled. I think we went on a cruise. We just really enjoyed one another. When we were 25 years old, we attempted adoption, and that's a whole nother story. I'm not sure if I'll ever do a blog post on that, but it's possible. Just to explain what we went through. It was honestly a nightmare, and I'm still shocked that what happened to us, but it did, and it's just part of our story. But it was definitely a failed attempt at pursuing adoption, and that was in 2011, August of 2011. 4 months later, in December of 2011, I got a positive pregnancy test. After, 7 years of not having a pregnancy, 6-7 years. No fertility treatments, just randomly got a positive pregnancy test. I immediately started having cramping and spotting, just like our old pregnancies. And sure enough, it was another ectopic pregnancy. So during that surgery, we had no choice but to remove that left fallopian tube to prevent this from happening again, because it is super dangerous. And the doctor told me during that time, which was really crazy, he went in and did the surgery and luckily was able to save my left ovary, which was a huge concern of ours. And he told me during that surgery that I did not have endometriosis. After 6-7 years of thinking I did, and doctors telling me that I would die unless I had a hysterectomy or get on birth control pills or get pregnant, he told me, you do not have endometriosis. The scarring that the doctor must have seen was because of your appendectomy when you were 12. So I had a ruptured appendix when I was 12, and that can cause scarring and inflammation, and especially in the tubes. So that is the cause for my tubal, issues. We have no other fertility issues other than that. And he, said, you don't have endometriosis. I saw no scar tissue. There was nothing there. He said, your ovary looks great. It is tucked. He told me it was tucked behind my uterus, which is very not where it's supposed to be. And so he said, that's why you probably haven't gotten pregnant in the last 7 years, because you basically have this. If this is my fallopian tube, you have these like fingers, and you have an ovary. Where are we at? We have an ovary over here, and that contains your eggs. Wow. And so when they burst each month, your little fingers are supposed to grab that egg and pull it into your fallopian tube. So my ovary was nowhere near this. It was like way back here. So it's a miracle that I even got pregnant the last ectopic, because they were not connected. They were nowhere near each other. He doesn't know if this is something I was born with, if it was because of the surgeries that I've had, the ectopic pregnancies. But it's definitely a miracle that I got pregnant when I did. But he said everything looked good. He saved my ovary. So at this point, I was 26 years old, 27, and had no fallopian tubes and only one ovary. So when you only have one ovary or no fallopian tubes, you can't get pregnant naturally. We can literally never get pregnant the old-fashioned way, because I'm actually missing what I jokingly call the highways to get to where the egg needs to go, or the sperm needs to go. So we literally cannot get pregnant the old-fashioned way. At this point, we had had the failed adoption experience. We attempted foster care. We went through all the classes, and honestly, just after all the classes, we felt no peace with it. Not that we won't ever attempt it again, or that it's not something that God could open our hearts to, but we just felt it wasn't the right time. You know, we did all the classes. We even like started to prepare a bedroom. We looked at bedding and we were like, this is going to be awesome. We'll do foster to adopt. And we just had no peace about it. We attempted our very first IVF in August of 2012. We responded super well on the lowest dose you can have. And I had 9 follicles, and at egg retrieval, they got 10 eggs. 8 of those eggs were mature, and we got the phone call the next day that none of our eggs fertilized. We did not do what's called ICSI, which is where they actually physically inject each egg with a sperm. We did not do that because we'd been pregnant 4 times. We didn't see a need for it. Our doctor said, you don't need to do that. So we listened to him. We didn't do ICSI, and none of our eggs fertilized. That cycle was about $8,000, and we had nothing to show for it. The doctor did admit that this was very uncommon. He said, I will give you a discounted cycle. So we went back in January of 2013 this year and did our second IVF. The doctor put me on a much lower dose. I was already on the lowest dose, but he cut it in half. And I was on that. And this time we had 12 follicles. And I called my doctor, and there's a lot of other stuff that went wrong with this cycle, like the doctor yelling at me, telling me I started my period too early, just different things that the doctors did that really didn't rub us the right way. So the day before egg retrieval, I felt popping, just like going on, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm ovulating on my own, which you're not supposed to do. So I called the doctor and said, I'm ovulating my own. I'm sure of it. And he said, no, you're not. That's not possible. We have you on drugs to keep you from doing that. I went in for the egg retrieval, and sure enough, I had ovulated on my own. Of the 12, they found 2 follicles left. They got 1 good egg. That egg did fertilize, but it wasn't the greatest quality. My theory, honestly, because I had 12 good sized follicles and normally have lots of other little ones that can like kind of catch up. My theory is that the 2 that they got were actually kind of immature to begin with. They were not great quality. They weren't one of the original 12. So it did fertilize. We put it back in on cycle day 3. And we had what's called a chemical pregnancy. We had positive pregnancy tests for about 6 or 7 days, very faint, but they just stayed positive. But my beta, which is your HCG blood test, came back at negative when I went in for that. So that cycle cost us about $6,000. So at that point, 6 months ago from now, we'd spent about $14,000 and had nothing to show for it. So that's our trying to conceive history.